Hook. For as long as I can remember, my cousin was the best of us. Dad held him up as an example. But the truth came out when I caught them in the kitchen. He said something to him that he never said to me. Growing up, I thought every kid dealt with this stuff. You know, having that one family member who just seemed to do everything right while you stumbled through life like you were walking in the dark. For me, that person was my cousin. Let's call him Josh. From the time I could walk, my dad was always throwing Josh in my face. Look at Josh, learn from him. Those words echoed through my childhood like a broken record that nobody bothered to fix. Josh lived 3 blocks away with my aunt, but he might as well have lived in our house for how often he came up in conversation. When I was 7, I brought home a drawing from school. I was so proud of it, a stick-figure family with a house and a dog. Normal kid stuff. I ran to my dad, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. He glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds before saying Josh had won some art contest at his school. My drawing ended up in the trash that same day. When I was 10, I made the school soccer team. I thought finally, I had something that would make him proud. I sprinted home, cleats still on, leaving mud tracks on the kitchen floor. I could barely get the words out fast enough. My dad nodded, then immediately launched into a story about how Josh had scored 3 goals in his game last week. The conversation lasted about 30 seconds before he went back to reading his newspaper. This became the pattern. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment where I thought I might finally measure up was immediately overshadowed by something Josh had done better, faster, or more impressively. It was like living in someone else's shadow, except that someone wasn't even my brother, he was my cousin. The real kicker was how different the rules were for us. When I was 15, I accidentally broke a lamp while roughhousing with friends in the living room. My dad grounded me for 2 weeks and made me pay for the replacement with money from my part-time job. When Josh crashed his bike into our neighbor's fence that same summer, my dad just laughed it off and said boys will be boys. He even helped Josh fix the fence without asking for any payment. School was another battlefield entirely. I was never a straight-A student, but I worked hard. When I brought home a B on a particularly difficult math test, a test where half the class had failed, my dad called me an idiot. Said I wasn't applying myself. Said I was wasting his money on tutoring. Meanwhile, Josh failed his driving test twice, and my dad just shrugged and said learning takes time. The double standard was so obvious it hurt. I started wondering if maybe I was adopted or something. That would explain why nothing I did seemed to matter. I even asked my mom once, half joking, if they found me on the doorstep. She got this weird look on her face and changed the subject real quick. By the time I hit 17, I'd pretty much given up trying to impress my dad. What was the point? No matter what I did, Josh was always going to be better in his eyes. I focused on my friends, my hobbies, anything that didn't involve seeking approval from someone who seemed incapable of giving it to me. Josh and I weren't enemies or anything. He was actually a decent guy, which somehow made it worse. If he'd been a jerk, at least I could have hated him properly. But he was just normal. He got good grades, played sports, had girlfriends. All the stuff I did too, but somehow when he did it, it mattered more. The summer before my senior year, things got really weird. Josh started spending even more time at our house. He'd come over for dinner 3 or 4 times a week. He'd hang out with my dad in the garage, working on cars or just talking. Sometimes I'd walk by and hear them laughing together, and it would hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't remember the last time my dad and I had laughed about anything. One night in July, I was coming home from a friend's house around midnight. I'd been out later than I was supposed to, so I was trying to sneak in through the back door. That's when I saw the light on in the kitchen. I figured someone just forgot to turn it off, but as I got closer, I could hear voices. It was my dad and Josh, sitting at the kitchen table with cups of coffee between them. They were talking quietly, but I could make out most of what they were saying through the screen door. Josh was talking about college applications, about being nervous about leaving home. Normal stuff, except for the way my dad was responding. He was being gentle, patient. He was giving Josh actual advice instead of just criticism. He was listening without interrupting, nodding along, asking follow-up questions. It was like watching a completely different person wearing my dad's face. Then Josh said something about being worried he wouldn't make us proud. And that's when my dad did something I'd never seen him do before. He reached across the table, put his hand on Josh's shoulder, and looked him right in the eyes. I'm already proud of you, son. Son. The word hit me like a freight train. I stood there frozen, gripping the door handle so tight my knuckles went white. My dad had never called me son. Not once in 18 years. It was always my name, or hey you, or when he was really angry, boy, but never son. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what came next. Josh got emotional. I could hear it in his voice even though I couldn't see his face clearly. He started talking about how grateful he was, how he knew the situation was complicated, how he never wanted to cause problems for our family. And my dad hugged him. A real hug, not one of those awkward shoulder pats he gave me on holidays. He told Josh that none of this was his fault, that he was sorry things had to be this way, that if he could change everything, he would. I didn't understand what they were talking about, but I knew it was big. Bigger than anything I was prepared for. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop replaying that conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it. The pieces were all there, but I couldn't put them together. Or maybe I didn't want to. Sometimes the truth is so obvious you convince yourself it can't be real because accepting it would change everything. Update 1. I couldn't let it go. For weeks after that night, I found myself watching my dad and Josh differently. Looking for clues, for signs, for anything that would explain what I'd heard. The way my dad's whole face lit up when Josh walked into a room. The way he remembered every detail of Josh's life but couldn't be bothered to ask about mine. The way he'd ruffle Josh's hair the same way other dads did with their sons. It was all right there in front of me, and I'd been too blind to see it. But I needed to know for sure. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't going crazy, that I wasn't reading too much into things. So I decided to ask my mom. I waited until we were alone in the house on a Saturday afternoon. Dad was at work, and it was just the two of us folding laundry in the living room. I tried to think of a casual way to bring it up, but there's no casual way to ask if your dad has been lying to you your entire life. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, can I ask you something? She looked up from the shirt she was folding. Of course, honey. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath. Is there something going on with Dad and Josh? Something I should know about? The shirt slipped from her hands. She bent down to pick it up, but I could see her face had gone pale. When she straightened up, she wasn't looking at me anymore. What do you mean? She asked, but her voice was different. Smaller. I mean the way Dad treats him. The way he talks to him. It's different from how he treats me, and I want to know why. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just stood there holding that shirt, staring at it like it held the secrets of the universe. Then she sat down heavily on the couch and patted the cushion next to her. Sit down, sweetheart. Those 3 words told me everything I needed to know. Nobody starts a conversation with sit down, sweetheart, unless they're about to drop a bomb on your life. Your father and I, she began, then stopped. Started again. Marriage isn't always. It's not always easy. People make mistakes. Sometimes big ones. I felt like I was watching a car accident in slow motion. I could see where this was going, but I couldn't stop it. About 20 years ago, your father went through a difficult time. We both did. We were having problems, and he found comfort elsewhere. Elsewhere. What a nice way to put it. With your aunt, I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, and I watched her age about 10 years in that moment. It was brief. A few months. But Josh happened. Another nod. When she found out she was pregnant, we all sat down and talked about what to do. Your father wanted to leave me, to be with her and the baby. But she didn't want that. She said it would destroy both families. So we made an arrangement. An arrangement. Like Josh was a business deal instead of a human being. She would raise him as a single mother. We would all pretend it was just one of those things that happens sometimes. And your father would be involved in his life, but as an uncle. Not as his father. Not officially. No. I felt sick. Everything suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. The favoritism, the double standards, the way my dad looked at Josh like he hung the moon. Of course he did. Josh was his son. His real son. The one he actually wanted. What about me? I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. Where do I fit into this arrangement? My mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You're our son. You're the light of our lives. This doesn't change that. But it did change that. It changed everything. Because suddenly I understood that I wasn't just competing with my cousin for my dad's attention. I was competing with his actual child. And I was losing because the game was rigged from the start. Does Josh know? I asked. We think so. We've never told him directly, but he's not stupid. I think he figured it out years ago. That explained the guilt in Josh's voice that night in the kitchen. The way he talked about the situation being complicated. He knew he was living a lie just as much as I was. How long were you planning to keep this from me? I asked. Forever, if we could, she said, and at least she was honest about that. We thought it would be easier for everyone if some secrets stayed buried. Easier for who? Not for me. Not for the kid who spent 18 years wondering why his own father seemed to hate him. Not for the kid who grew up thinking he was fundamentally flawed because nothing he did was ever good enough. I got up from the couch and walked toward the door. My mom called after me, but I didn't turn around. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to be anywhere but in that house with those people who had been lying to me my entire life. I drove around for hours that day, just trying to process everything. I kept thinking about all the times I'd blamed myself for my dad's indifference. All the times I'd wondered what was wrong with me, why I couldn't make him proud. Turns out there was nothing wrong with me. I just wasn't his real son. When I finally went home that night, my parents were waiting for me in the living room. They wanted to talk, to explain, to make me understand. But what was there to understand? They had made their choice 20 years ago, and I was just collateral damage. My dad tried to tell me that he loved me, that I was his son in every way that mattered. But if that was true, why had he spent my entire childhood making me feel like I was never enough? Why had Josh gotten all the patience and encouragement while I got criticism and disappointment? I told them I needed time to think, and they said they understood. But I could see the fear in their eyes. They were terrified I was going to blow up their carefully constructed lie, tell everyone the truth, destroy the family reputation they'd worked so hard to protect. Part of me wanted to do exactly that. Part of me wanted to call Josh right then and there and tell him everything I knew, just to watch their world burn. But I didn't. Not because I was protecting them, but because I was protecting myself. I wasn't ready for that conversation. I wasn't ready for any of this. Update 2. The weeks after that conversation were some of the strangest of my life. I was walking around with this huge secret, and nobody knew I knew. Josh still came over for dinner. My dad still praised him and criticized me. My mom still pretended everything was normal. It was like being trapped in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. But the weirdest part was how differently I saw everything now. Every interaction between my dad and Josh took on new meaning. When Josh graduated high school that spring, my dad was in the front row taking pictures and cheering. When I graduated 2 weeks later, he showed up late and left early. Before, I would have been hurt. Now, I just felt empty. I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. Like how my dad and Josh had the same laugh. The same way of rubbing their chin when they were thinking. Josh had my dad's eyes, something everyone always commented on, but I'd never realized how significant that was. I also started noticing how my aunt acted around my dad. She was always nervous when he was around, always trying to keep Josh away from him when other family members were present. At big family gatherings, she'd hover nearby whenever they talked, like she was afraid someone might overhear something they shouldn't. The hardest part was watching Josh. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see the guilt eating at him. He'd get this look on his face sometimes when my dad was being particularly harsh with me, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. A few times, he even tried to stick up for me in small ways, but my dad would just brush him off. Summer came and went, and I started my senior year feeling like I was living in a different world than everyone else. My friends were worried about college applications and prom dates, and I was trying to figure out how to exist in a family built on lies. Josh started his freshman year at a college about 2 hours away. I thought maybe with him gone, things would get better between me and my dad. Maybe without the constant comparison, he'd finally see me for who I was. But it didn't work that way. If anything, it got worse. Now instead of just praising Josh, my dad started missing him. Loudly. At dinner, he'd talk about how quiet the house was, how much he missed having Josh around. He'd call Josh every Sunday and talk for an hour, asking about his classes, his friends, his life. Meanwhile, I was sitting right there at the same table, and he barely acknowledged my existence. One Sunday in October, I was doing homework in my room when I heard my dad on the phone with Josh. The walls in our house were thin, and his voice carried. He was laughing at something Josh had said, really cracking up. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "I love you too, kiddo. More than you know." I've been waiting 18 years to hear those words directed at me. Josh got them in a casual phone conversation. That's when something inside me finally broke. Not in a dramatic, explosive way. More like a slow leak that had finally emptied the tank. I realized I was done. Done trying to earn something that was never going to be mine. Done competing in a race where the finish line kept moving. Done being the consolation prize in my own family. I made a decision that night. I was going to stop caring. Not as a form of rebellion or to prove a point, but as a form of self-preservation. I was going to treat my dad exactly the way he treated me, politely, distantly, without any real emotional investment. It was surprisingly easy once I committed to it. When he criticized my grades, I just nodded and said I'd try harder. When he compared me to Josh, I agreed that Josh was great. When he ignored my achievements, I stopped sharing them with him altogether. The change was subtle but profound. I stopped seeking his approval because I finally understood it was never going to come. I stopped taking his criticism personally because I realized it wasn't really about me anyway. I was just the stand-in for the son he couldn't publicly claim. My mom noticed the change first. She asked me if I was okay, if I was upset about something. I told her I was fine, just focusing on school and getting ready for college. She didn't push, but I could see the worry in her eyes. My dad took longer to catch on, mainly because he wasn't paying that much attention to begin with. But eventually, even he noticed that something was different. I wasn't arguing with him anymore, wasn't trying to prove myself, wasn't getting emotional when he said hurtful things. One night in November, Josh came home for a long weekend. At dinner, my dad was going on and on about Josh's first semester, how well he was doing, how proud he was. In the past, I would have felt that familiar stab of jealousy and inadequacy. Now, I just ate my food and listened like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. After dinner, Josh found me in my room doing homework. He knocked on the door frame and asked if he could come in. I told him sure, and he sat down on my desk chair while I stayed on my bed. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Have I?" "Yeah, different quiet. Not angry quiet. Just quiet." I looked at him for a long moment. He was genuinely concerned, which somehow made everything worse. Here was this kid who had unknowingly been the source of so much pain in my life, and he was worried about me. "I'm fine," I said. "Just growing up, I guess." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. "If you ever want to talk about anything, you know I'm here, right? We're family." Family. If only he knew how complicated that word had become for me. "I know," I said. "Thanks." He left after that, but I could see in his eyes that he knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what, and I wasn't about to tell him. The rest of that weekend was more the same. My dad doted on Josh, ignored me, and acted like this was perfectly normal. Josh tried to include me in conversations, but I kept my responses short and polite. My mom watched all of this with increasing anxiety. When Josh left on Sunday, my dad was genuinely sad. He hugged him goodbye and told him to drive carefully and call when he got back to school. Then he went inside and sulked for the rest of the day. That night, my mom came to my room and closed the door behind her. She sat on the edge of my bed and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I know this is hard," she said. "I know it's not fair. But he does love you. In his own way." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I didn't know he loved me in whatever way he was capable of. But I also knew it would never be enough. It would never be the kind of love that Josh got without even trying. "It's okay, Mom," I told her. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." She asked me what I meant by that, but I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell your mother that you've given up on your father? How do you say that you've decided to stop wanting something you've wanted your entire life? Final update. Senior year flew by faster than I expected. I kept my head down, focused on my college applications, and maintained my new policy of emotional distance from my dad. It was peaceful in a way. Without the constant hope and disappointment cycle, I found I actually had more energy for other things. I got accepted to a good school about 4 hours away from home, far enough to feel independent, close enough for holidays if I wanted them. My dad's reaction when I told him was typically underwhelming. He nodded and said it was a decent school, then immediately started talking about how Josh was thinking about changing his major. Graduation came and went. My dad attended, took a few pictures, and spent most of the ceremony texting. Josh came home for it, which was nice. He seemed genuinely proud of me, which felt both good and strange. Sometimes I wondered if things would have been different between us if we'd grown up knowing the truth. Maybe we could have been real brothers instead of cousins pretending not to notice the elephant in the room. The summer before college was peaceful. I worked at a local restaurant, saved money, and stayed out of the house as much as possible. My parents seemed to sense that I was pulling away, but they didn't know how to stop it. Honestly, I don't think they really wanted to. The truth was too complicated, too messy, too threatening to their carefully constructed normal life. One night in August, about a week before I was supposed to leave for college, my dad knocked on my bedroom door. This was unusual. He never came to my room unless I was in trouble for something. I told him to come in, and he stood there awkwardly for a moment before sitting down in my desk chair. "So you're really leaving," he said. Yeah. Next Thursday. He nodded and looked around my room, taking in the packed boxes and empty shelves. You excited? Yeah, I am. Another nod. Then, out of nowhere, he said, I know I haven't been the best father to you. The words hung in the air between us. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I don't know how to explain it, he continued. I don't know how to make it right. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. You're a good kid. You're going to do great things. It was the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get from him. Part of me wanted to ask him why it had taken 18 years to say those words. Part of me wanted to tell him everything I knew, to force him to confront the real reason behind his behavior. But mostly, I just felt tired. Thanks, Dad, I said. That means a lot. He nodded again, then got up and headed for the door. Just before he left, he turned back and said, You know I love you, right? I know, I said, and this time I really meant it. I didn't know he loved me. It just wasn't the same kind of love he felt for Josh, and I was finally okay with that. College was exactly what I needed. Distance, independence, and the chance to figure out who I was without constantly being compared to someone else. I made friends, did well in my classes, and slowly started to heal from 18 years of feeling like I wasn't enough. I came home for Christmas break, and it was like visiting a different planet. Everything looked the same, but I felt like a completely different person. My parents were nervous around me, like they were afraid I might have changed in some fundamental way. Josh was home too, and we actually had some good conversations. He seemed more relaxed, less guilty. College had been good for him too. My dad was still my dad, distant, critical, emotionally unavailable. But it didn't hurt anymore. I could see him clearly now, could see his limitations and his fears and his inability to deal with the mess he'd created. I felt sorry for him more than anything else. On Christmas morning, we all exchanged gifts like a normal family. My dad got me a sweater that was 2 sizes too big and the wrong color. Josh got a new laptop and a heartfelt card about how much my dad missed him. The difference was so obvious it would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. But here's the thing, I didn't care anymore. I had built a life for myself that didn't depend on my dad's approval or attention. I had friends who valued me, professors who respected my work, and a future that was entirely my own. Josh could have all the praise and attention he wanted. I didn't need it anymore. I went back to school in January and threw myself into my studies. I changed my major to something I was passionate about, joined clubs, started dating. I called home once a week out of obligation, but the conversations were short and surface level. My mom would try to get me to talk longer, but I always had somewhere else to be. Josh and I stayed in touch through social media and texts. He never asked directly about what had changed between me and my dad, but I think he suspected something. We had a good relationship now, built on mutual respect rather than forced family loyalty. In a weird way, learning the truth had freed both of us. Years passed. I graduated college, got a good job, moved to a different state. I came home for major holidays and family events, but I kept my visits short and my expectations low. My dad and I had settled into a polite but distant relationship that worked for both of us. He stopped trying to parent me, and I stopped looking for his approval. Josh graduated too, got married, had kids. My dad was over the moon about becoming a grandfather, though he couldn't say so publicly. He spoiled those kids rotten, the same way he'd spoiled Josh. I watched it all with detached interest, like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. The funny thing is, once I stopped caring about my dad's opinion, he actually started respecting me more. Not in a loving, fatherly way, but in the way you respect a stranger who has their life together. He'd ask about my job, my apartment, my girlfriend. The conversations were stilted and formal, but they were better than the constant criticism of my youth. Looking back now, I realized that learning the truth about Josh was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because the truth itself was good, it wasn't. It was painful and unfair, and it explained a lot of hurt that didn't need to exist. But it freed me from spending the rest of my life trying to earn something that was never going to be mine. I stopped being angry at Josh a long time ago. None of this was his fault. He was just a kid caught up in adult decisions he had no control over. If anything, I felt bad for him. He had to live with the guilt of knowing he was loved more than his cousin for reasons that had nothing to do with who he was as a person. I stopped being angry at my mom, too. She made the best decision she could in an impossible situation. She tried to hold our family together even when the foundation was cracked. I respect her for that, even if I don't agree with all her choices. My dad? I'm still working on forgiving him. Not for Josh, but for me. For the way he made me feel for 18 years. For the way he let me blame myself for his inability to love me the way I needed to be loved. For the way he chose to protect his secret instead of protecting his son. But here's what I've learned. You can't make someone love you the way you want to be loved. You can't earn affection that should be freely given. You can't fix broken people by being perfect yourself. And you can't build a healthy relationship on a foundation of lies. I have a good life now. I'm happy, successful, and surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not for who they wish I could be. I don't need my dad's approval anymore because I've learned to approve of myself. I don't need to be the favorite son because I've learned to be my own person. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the truth had come out when I was younger. Would my dad have been more honest about his feelings? Would we have found a way to have a real relationship? Would the family have fallen apart completely? I'll never know, and that's okay. The truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I found my way out of that toxic cycle of seeking approval I was never going to get. What matters is that I learned to value myself even when the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally couldn't figure out how to do it. I still see my family sometimes. Josh and I have a good relationship now, built on honesty and mutual respect. My mom and I talk regularly, and she's finally stopped trying to fix things that can't be fixed. My dad and I are cordial but distant, which is probably the best we can hope for. And you know what? That's enough. It has to be enough. Because the alternative is spending the rest of my life waiting for something that's never going to come. And I've got better things to do with my time than wait for someone else to decide I'm worth loving. The little boy who desperately wanted his father's approval is gone. In his place is a man who knows his own worth, who doesn't need anyone else's validation to feel complete. It took me a long time to get here, but I'm glad I made the journey. Some families are built on love. Others are built on lies. The lucky ones figure out the difference before it's too late. I'm one of the lucky ones, even if it doesn't always feel that way. Thanks for reading my story. I know it's not the happiest ending, but sometimes the real victory is just surviving and finding your own way forward. To anyone dealing with family dysfunction, it's not your fault, and you're not alone. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop trying to fix what's broken and focus on building something better for yourself.